All right, guys, in the essence of time, I want to respect everyone who showed up on time. I want to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us. First and foremost, we are recording, taking meeting notes, the AI tool. We will also send out a copy of the presentation notes afterwards. But this is really a genesis of conversations that Tanya and I have been having. It actually goes back to earlier times when she lived in Oakland. We just talked about different topics, different issues of the day. And one of the big things we saw from that standpoint, let's go beyond talk, like we commonly see in TED Talks. Let's actually put some action to this. So to be quite candid, this is a pilot, and we definitely would welcome your feedback so that we go about iterating and improving along the way. It is our goal, be the whole idea of Fissions, that we can improve the overall process across the board. And again, we welcome your feedback. We are not going to pretend we have all the answers. How do we improve this? And how do we look to further expand this down the road? Okay, so a couple things here, just to keep it short and brief. We intended these presentations, the actual sessions itself, to be very short and very brief. So the first thing is, I'm Ron Berry. As you see here, the eye candy. And then I also have Tanya Leek, class of 92. And one of the things that she's very much an advocate for, as you all know, is healthy eating. And so she'll talk about that. Tanya hails from New York, and she'll talk later part of this session. Okay, as far as today's agenda, we're going to do the introduction. Really, that's kind of more like, setting the table. The meat of this conversation starts with our Fission, and that's what Tanya will talk through. Then we'll have a breakout discussion with everyone across the board, and then we'll report out and discuss next steps, and we'll close it out. And along the way, if you have any feedback, please use your chat feature on your Zoom screen, and we'll take it from there. Okay, sorry, I think I went too far. Okay, so very quickly, as I mentioned, Black2Impact is more or less a mashup of various conversations and various, influences that we have had. You have TED Talks, we call it Tyrone-like talks, just for our audience. We also look at community focus, and really we talk about the Black Alumni Summit. I think one of the things that we really like a lot is it brings us all together. We talk about key thoughts. I mean, it's very invigorating for all of us. At the same time, we also like into Crossroads, where we had our much more deeper discussions, where we really hit home on the items of the day that directly impacted us. And then we look at various social media challenges, just in terms of our ability you put your phone on mute, excuse me. Social media challenges really where it came down to our ability to figure out here, how do we collaborate and how do we act accordingly? And then the goal for us is not just to talk, it's able to establish a very unique, curated forum that allows us to talk, discuss, share, and really act upon issues that directly impact our community. And so the key thing for us is not just to be speculative, it's basically also able to use evidence, use evidence-based, data-driven theories, keep it factual across the board, and also allowing us to have a time to innovate. And because, again, the key thing for us, this is not sounding egotistical. The thing that really sets us apart when I talk to all of you is that we look to disrupt, not doing the same thing, looking to do things much differently. And we then want to make sure that everyone's busy. We also want to make sure that we're able to act on this. We establish viral actions that can spread very quickly by keeping it very simple to the point that makes it easily executable. Okay, so here's our challenge. Progress obviously has required significant time and investment on our part, and I don't have to recount what's going on today. We could say very much that the chips are against us. We could sit here and talk about it. We could whine about it, but we don't want to talk about it anymore. We choose to act, and that's really the key principles driving us forward from that standpoint. So, what is our solution? It's what we call Fissions. I'm not trying to go back to the times of the physics tanks. But the whole idea behind this is the fact, with nuclear standpoint, to provide us a very thoughtful forum to challenge things that we consider norms and ignite action. And so within our angel fission, as you'll see, we'll raise conventional topics like health, like let's say like voting and so forth. We'll counter with challenging opinions and perspectives. And then we'll also look to really disrupt through promoting thoughtful leadership and action. And then what's our differentiation? We'll talk about this more, is that we're not just talking about it. We're actually going to establish actions and hold ourselves accountable. As you'll see throughout the rest of these slides, we'll be very specific in our actions, we'll be very atomic, and we'll be able to push this all forward. Tanya.
Thank you, Ron. So for those of you who are my fellow engineers out there, you may remember, he mentioned the physics tank, that fission is the splitting. So it is a nuclear process, right, of a heavy, unstable nucleus into two lighter nuclei, right? And it also comes with the release of a large amount of energy. So that's really what we're after, right? We're really looking at the actions that Ron was talking about, determining what those are, implementing them, and then evaluating them as a lighter version. He mentioned being easier for a particular substantial next action. Now, this method, as we'll talk about in a moment, has been proven to actually foster greater forward momentum. So you establish what is called success momentum and facilitate continuous enhancement and success. And that's where we think the differentiator will be. Next slide.
Okay, then we get into, go ahead, sorry, Tanya.
This all comes from, some of you may be familiar with a book called Atomic Habits. There's also a book called Tiny Habits by actually a member of the Stanford faculty, so BJ Fogg. And we take our inspiration from there. Really, the focus of an atomic action is that they're small and that they require really little effort or motivation, this concept of motivation to implement. But what they create are these ripples that lead to major impact in this case, our everyday lives.
Okay, so these are the key tenets. When you think about when you're walking in your closet, what are you hanging on? These are the key things we're looking at for the most part as we go throughout each stage of each of our fissions. First of all, it needs to be precise. In other words, it needs to be very specific and very on point in terms of what we're doing here. The more we do that, the more we minimize confusion across the board. Second of all, it needs to be bounded. So we're not trying to give you a length like, hey, go out there and solve rights. We want to make sure it's very bounded in terms. By doing that, it's much more achievable and allows us, psychologically to make sure that we're demonstrating progress along the board. Another key thing here, it's like anything, it needs to be executable. We can't just talk about it. If we're going to talk about it, we need to be very definitive in terms of how we're going to allow actions to actually be able to act upon it across the board. The other key thing here is I'm very much, a believer in Peter Drucker, needs to be measurable. The whole idea there is you can only improve or manage what can be measured. That's the same through here. And then the last thing, it needs to be impactful. We can't just, it needs to, basically it has a ripple effect. Maybe at first it'll be a small atom, but over time it'll build up. We'll see further momentum down that standpoint. Okay, I'll turn it over to Tanya. Today's fission.
So that gives you a bit of background as to where we would like something like this to go. I hope that you all will, as you listen to this, this is where we've given you a lot of background to start with. This wouldn't be how we would start a typical fission, but this is the background of kind of where we've come from and where we are headed to in terms of what I'm going to speak about next. So with that, as promised, the fission will be short. The intent is really, as you saw in the agenda, to, as promised, over the next 10 or so minutes, I'm going to hit you with a bunch of, I'm going to call them provocative, but Ron referred to them as innovative and disruptive, provocative statements that ultimately will lead to what I'll propose to you as the atomic action that we can leave here with. So, next slide. The category for this fission is Black health. And what I'll talk to you about is this concept of why our health, what's up with our health, what's needed for our health. And I'm going to get to that and statistics and evidence and data for what's up with Black health. But in a nutshell, my thesis and my first provocative statement is that the US healthcare system is leaving us as a community, as a Black community behind, and that we need to take steps towards ownership of improving our health outcomes. Now, let's talk about why I say that. And so we'll go to the quote from Booker T. Washington, which is, for those of you who have read my book, I'm just gonna let that go out there into the ether, on Black health. You know this quote from Booker T. Washington. And I'm going to co-opt it as my second provocative statement of this fission. The future of the race depends on the conservation of its health. I'm going to assume that we can agree that a pretty good mind came up with it. Then I'm going to ask if anyone knows the context for when he came up with it. And just so you don't feel like this is a quiz, the beginning of the 20th century, as part of his founding what was called Negro Health Week at the time. It was a week that was dedicated to education and information to help Black people act towards improving their health outcomes. Sound familiar? It was also said a year before he himself died at the age of 59 of congestive heart failure. Think about this. How much more could he have done to advance not only our health, but our race if he had not been sick? I'll leave you with that as I make my next provocative statement. Next slide. Which is actually a restatement of what he said. Provocative statement number 3 is we can't do shit if we're sick. Yes, this is an after 8 o'clock presentation on the East Coast. This leads to a provocative question. How can you fight for change, put in that extra effort that's needed to make progress when you're stressed, overwhelmed, sick, and tired? When we looked at models for Black2Impact, Ron and I looked to 5 categories that were used by the National Urban League with their State of Black America Equality Index. We wanted to use that as a starting point for conversations and actions about how we as Black folks can come together for the greater good. Next slide. The 5 core areas.
Isn't it so positive? Isn't it so positive, by the way? We can't do, that's beautiful.
These 5 core areas are our economic status, health, education, social justice, and civic engagement. Today, we're discussing our health. And you might ask why, especially when what you'll see here is that in the numbers, which health is registered there as the red numbers, areas like social justice, which is in the gray, they've gone down more significantly. Well, my response to that is that although the Equality Index says that Black health has improved between 2005 and 2022, many of the index's health statistics numbers are outdated. In many cases, pre-pandemic 2019 numbers. And I am here, biased as I might be as a health and wellness coach and devotee, as for those of you who know me, to all things health and wellness. I'm here to propose that our health is the most critical factor in our ability to make progress happen in the other areas, especially social justice. Why? Next slide. Racism is a pandemic. You could consider this a provocative statement, but since I don't know who said it, I'm just going to keep rolling. So the CDC noted that racism is a serious threat to the public's health when they looked at Black and brown people in the US that experienced a 2.9 and 3-year decline in life expectancy, respectively, in 2020. And that's compared with a 1.2-year decline for white people. So in this same study, they also state that to transform public health, we have to reimagine our systems and the data that is in them. So the quote is, data systems that only document racial health disparities without measuring inequities and racism that fuel them contribute to the problem. So this failure in the misperception that health disparities are merely biological or primarily behavioral, rather than caused by some of the structures and systems of an inequitable society. So I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward. Next slide. My next provocative statement is Black people should be extinct by now. We should be extinct by now. Now, one of my pet peeves is when people talk about how bad Black folks have it without talking about the positive. So let me add, Black people are some of the most resilient people on this earth. Yes, we should be extinct by now, but we're not. We keep coming back and succeeding in new areas. We are strong beyond even our stereotypes of one another. Yet with all of that strength and resilience, for every 2 steps forward, we seem to take at least 1.5 steps back. And with each step forward, we also, my next provocative statement, have a tendency to lose sight of what we're fighting for and to, in effect, grow apart. Now, I've lost count of my provocative statements, so bear with me. That was, another one. So Black2Impact is an attempt to not only create a powerful singular focus towards which we can align, come together, and fight for, but also bring the power of our strength and resiliency en masse collectively to that focus. So with that in mind, let's talk about this multidimensional, strong, resilient thing that is our health. Next slide. While the numbers bear out that we suffer disparities in virtually every chronic disease, this is not unexpected when we look to the concept of weathering. So again, we may all know the definition of weathering as the process of wearing or being worn by long exposure to the atmosphere. Well, in the context of public health, the weathering hypothesis states that chronic exposure to social and economic disadvantage leads to an accelerated decline in physical health outcomes. And I would actually deign to say mental health outcomes as well. And it could partially explain racial disparities in a wide array of health conditions. So, in other words, we're being worn down by long exposure to the micro stressors of disadvantage. Now, while many of us may be fortunate enough to not consider ourselves economically disadvantaged, we must understand that we're worn down nevertheless socially every time we're exposed to a news story, a headline, a TikTok, YouTube, or Instagram reel that depicts the reality of disadvantage for others of us. Some of us may also say that if we stay in the mindset of disadvantage, then we'll remain disadvantaged. I agree, to a point. We can maintain a healthy mindset and move together in the direction of positive change at the same time that we acknowledge the fact that the weathering phenomenon likely exists for us. I want you to notice the image on the slide. This image is the result of my search, my AI search, I'll have you know, for an image on erosion. Notice that out of erosion can come something beautiful. Out of the energy that is generated by this fission to change this weathering phenomenon, we can take charge of our own health today so that we have the strength and resilience to take the next steps tomorrow. And that's the focus of this fission, to come together for the good of all in a small collective way towards our health using that healthy mindset. Next slide. So in the spirit of atomic actions, what's needed to do this? As I've mentioned, greater minds than mine have thought that education and information, as well as data and systems, can play a role in making a difference for our health. So what is this small way, this atomic action that we can use to begin to educate and inform ourselves on our health, to support our own advocacy and improvements to our health outcomes, take ownership of those same outcomes, and do it all while reconnecting as a community? I love this bell hook quote, because I do have to say, Black women in particular, our ability and potential to make a difference is multiplied when we pay attention to our health. So with that, next slide, may I propose our atomic action for this Fission. We propose that we capture focused family health history. And what does focus mean? We start with getting information about our parents, our mother and father. We'll have the optional ability to add siblings, but focus on our parents and understanding our health history from that perspective, with a secondary focus on certain data and conditions, not some generalized question about health history. Then we share and link with other family, cousins, children. We create conversations around our family health history. And lastly, we broaden the circle to share more broadly in our community. So, by when? Well, between now and Thanksgiving Day, we are challenging you to this atomic action to capture your parents' family health history along the lines of very specific data and conditions in honor of Thanksgiving Day, which actually is Family Health History Day. It's a national observance. So how will we do that? We're going to provide, Black2Impact will provide a HIPAA-compliant online form to capture this specific atomic focused data. So this will enable us to not only make it atomic and easy, but we'll also be able to track our success. Now, speaking of success, next slide. How do we measure success? We propose two particular measures which relate to our goals with Black2Impact. The first is how many of you complete health history forms on your parents in the areas requested. And the second is, how do we create and maximize this collective? How many folks can we bring it out to? How many non-attendees will complete health history forms due to your influence, due to your community network, and sharing the message of what we can do together? So with that, let's talk about how we move forward from my proposals. Ron?
This is our overall flow. We started off with the Fission itself. We presented it in the overall purpose. You understand that. Now we're out to break out and discuss. After we conclude this presentation, then, as Tanya stated, we'll go about reporting and confirming overall the information. If you notice, the beauty about this is we kept it very small, very atomic, but we also had in there the overall viral action, being able to spread the word through friends and family and through your community. And then we're going to go about executing and narrating. If we're going to follow the Fission theme, we're going to provide you a form to allow you to track and report the results. As we mentioned, make sure that it's HIPAA compliant. Then we'll come back and review and do some retrospective. What worked, what didn't work, and how can we improve and advance upon this? Then we go about strategizing and planning for either our next atomic action or our next Fission along the way. So again, it's a very cyclical thing. We keep it very tight, very concise, and we can replicate it accordingly. Okay, now it's time for our breakout sessions. I'm taking note of the time. Because you started a few minutes late, I'm going to cut it down to 15 minutes. That'll allow us ample time to get back, talk, and this is the key items we're going to talk about. First of all, we'll have 2 breakout rooms where Tiny will talk about the overall viral nature. What can we do to basically spread the word? And also how can we gamify it, making it, much more exciting, much more competitive. And then me wearing more of the operational hat, I'm going to talk about the infrastructure. What can we do to make the atomic action easier? What is needed to ensure successful execution? And what can we do to enhance the overall outcome and the results? And so really what we'll do here, Tony's setting up the 2 breakout rooms now. Breakout, we'll talk through it, come back with some very concrete thoughts here, and then we'll go about reporting out afterwards and conclude. So that's the essence of how we set this up, structured it, taking advantage of the time accordingly. Tanya, where are you right now?
If you make me a host, I can do the breakout rooms.
Give me 1 second here.
So again, you can choose which breakout room you'd like to provide input on. And keep in mind that we will, of course, in good fashion, ask you to complete a survey if you have any other suggestions, comments, questions that have to do with Black2Impact in general. All right, so I am going to create the breakout room for viral nature, which is how we're going to establish the community. And then also for infrastructure, let me spell it right. I know I have my, I gotta get it right with intellectuals. Okay, so I'm gonna open the rooms now and you can choose, you should be able to choose which room you would like to be put into. You'll have 20 minutes and we'll see you back here. Your rooms will now be closing. I have to tell you, this is the first time I've done you can broadcast your audio. Did you guys hear my voice?
That was pretty dope. That was pretty dope.
Loud?
I didn't know you could do the voice either. That was just text.
No, there's a new thing. Broadcast your voice. I was like, okay, let's try this.
It worked. It worked like a champ. That was pretty scary, actually. But yeah, it was good. Okay, so Tanya, you have host. You want to go ahead and share your screen? You want me to share mine?
You can share yours. Hold on, let me just give you. Where are you, Ron?
You guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Tanya, you want to start?
Yes, I will start. So we had a wonderful discussion. We talked about viral, making it viral. And the first thing we talked about is this concept of getting out into using social media. And most, well, we had folks talk about how they have Facebook family reunion networks and communities. We also talked about the Facebook group that's ME Week, which is actually Stanford focused. So to have something there. There are others who also have family networks and chats on WhatsApp. So being able to use those to spread it within our sort of local networks and communities of family We didn't talk a lot about sort of, well, actually, no. Nicole, I have to give Nicole props on this. She brought up Facebook challenges, and kind of this concept of social media challenges and talking about what not to talk about on Thanksgiving and what to talk about, kind of rallying around that day, which is Family Health History Day, which she'd never heard of and most people haven't heard of, which is kind of crazy because it is a national observance. So, but they haven't done a lot with it. So we can take advantage of that. The second thing that we talked about that was, I think, really, really important, and it's the reason why Ron and I are pursuing sort of the HIPAA sort of compliance, is the trust factor. So having some explicit information about how the data will be used, who has access to it, where it's stored, and then communicating that in terms of the intent. And we highlighted, because we had a couple of medical professionals in our group, comparing it to what is family history is used for when you see your doctor, and how that's used, and kind of how we're going a little short of that in terms of we're not recommending any screening, but this is really about having the conversation and having the information. So we also brought up a secondary goal to also sort of help with the viral nature, is to actually talk about the fact that it's useful to not only our own health, but also as we have the conversations to our extended families, right? When we get our parents, our siblings benefit, right? When we get cousins to participate, and aunts, then everyone benefits. So the last thing is to find a useful output that you can take to your doctor. Once the information has been collected, having the data is going to be very valuable. So those were our major takeaways.
Okay, from our side, we actually had a very good discussion, across the board. We could have definitely talked for hours on this, so definitely welcome everyone's feedback. I think a few things that we saw as a natural pivot is focuses more on health awareness, and allowing that itself would make it much more of a positive discussion, and like pretty much, lessen, like people will be much more open, less, because health is still a very sensitive area for a lot of families. So with that lens in mind, I think the other thing we saw here is with the overall idea of privacy. As you noted, privacy is a big concern for a lot of families. What information is shared, what information is shared back with us. So I thought it was great for me to work with all of you, getting your feedback. What's the best way for us to craft this across the board to make sure, again, goal here is that we're capturing the information, we're socializing the information. But one of the great things that were brought up, AG brought this up, which I thought was neat, is like, let's flip the script. Rather than simply just capturing the data itself, why don't we come back and say, okay, what can we do to be much more proactive? These are the 4 or 5 common health elements, say hypertension. If you do these things, so that way if you hit that box, you do these things to take care of this across the board. And that way it'll allow us to be much more proactive. We can still kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We can capture their health, but just as importantly, we can also follow up with an actual action itself of things that they can do. And I believe AG indicated you could share a report that was put together. I forgot the doctor's name, but that's something that we can share for everyone across the board. We focus on 4 or 5 things. Let's say hypertension is going to be one of the critical ones that typically plague us as a community. I like how we go about addressing that. And then I think the other thing ultimately is that we sit back and say, this is one step. Ultimately, what is our vision for this? And as we step through this, what are we looking to accomplish along the way? So making sure we're very goal-minded across the board. Other thing we said here is as well, the first iteration is simply capturing that data itself. And then we can iterate on that, because there are things like location, which becomes very important when you think about location, whether it be at home or at work, how that's another critical factor as it impacts our health. And so as we further refine and dig into the data, whatever we choose to do it, whether it be AI, machine learning type approach, we can factor that data in. But right now, the first iteration, let's just capture the data. Then we can, as we identify different scenarios, we can further expand upon that. Let's see if I'm missing anything else. I think the other thing here is going back to that simple theme of implementation science, that we're choosing elements and we're providing actions, we're acting upon that. I really like that as a suggestion. And so ultimately, one of the things, if I go into the next steps here, let's wrap up here. Tanya, I will sit here and collect your thoughts and notes and minutes. and then we'll sit back here because I think this probably necessitates not just one meeting, but we follow up like individual meetings with our separate discussions, talk about how we're going to act. We follow up accordingly. We'll talk to you more about the HIPAA form. That was the other critical thing about the HIPAA form. We want to do stuff that people currently use. That was a key point that Patrice raised. Like we don't do something very different, but if they're used to like capturing this information, like in my charts or their own hospital, we'd like to follow a very similar form to ease adoption, ease usage across the board. So that's something else I need to think through. We'll socialize some ideas, but this is a great conversation across the board. And
Yeah.
so
Thank you to everyone. I do want to make sure as we're winding up, there will be a survey. You can choose to engage with us at whatever level, just agree to do the action, or you can go further in terms of working with us, proposing another fission or even another atomic action. So please, 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 I think a lot of your comments, you could just say, see my comments to Ron or Tanya, if that's appropriate. But all of that really helps us to make this something that moves forward, and creates the ability for us to make ripples that create significant change.
absolutely. And again, I really thank you all. I can't tell you enough. Like I said, it's a labor of love. We've been working on this for a while here, but we definitely will welcome your feedback, as Tanya indicated. This is a pilot, so we're looking to further refine this across the board and be very explicit, be very brutally honest about what we can do to further improve this. But well, this is like a first goal of Fission itself. How do we increase awareness, to our family members? What other things can we do along the way? And with that,
I did send the link for the CDC announcement about Family History Day, which began in 2004 when the U.S. Surgeon General declared it. So if you want that data, with that,
you put in one of Tanya's quotes, one of her provocations. Keep it positive. Oh, but guys, I know it's late, but I thank you all very much. It's early in the West Coast, but I thank you all very much for attending.
Thanks for doing this and putting it together.
Organizing. Yeah, thank you for organizing.
have a great night, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Can't say it enough.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you
Grace,
all.
Good night.
good night.